Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome to The Print. Today we have with us Mr. Rahul Pandita, who's a journalist, he's an author. He has written extensively and reported extensively from conflict areas. He has reported from Sri Lanka, Iraq, has written extensively on Kashmir as well. And today we are here to talk about his book that he has recently written. And the name of the book is Lover Boy of Bahawalpur, How the Pulwama Case Was Cracked. So without wasting any time, we'll delve into the book that we recently got, and I had the pleasure to read it, go through it. Since I have myself covered the Pulwama attack, I know what an extensive investigation it was, what all went into how the officers investigated this case. In fact, sir, you have written in your book how the Pulwama case, in fact, reached a dead end because for almost a year, there were no arrests made as so many of the encounters took place. The accused were dying one after the other. And the police did not have much on how to piece together the case and really, tell the public how this incident took place. So if you can just tell us something about the book and your experience researching about the book, how you approach those officers that we have read about in the book. And let me congratulate you before you start that it's a very interesting book, a very good read. In fact, once you pick up the book, you don't feel like putting it down. So you can just finish the book in 2 days. I mean, of course, you'll stop doing everything else that you're doing and just concentrate on the book. But congratulations for it, and off you go.
Thank you, Ananya. Well, the case intrigued me because I call myself a student of Kashmir, and I cover Kashmir almost on a day-to-day basis, along with what happens in the Naxal heartland. These are my two areas of specialty. And when, of course, Pulwama happened, it turned out to be the worst terrorist attack to have ever happened in Kashmir in its 3 decades of bloodied history. So like any other reporter who covers Kashmir, I started looking at the case and what was happening. But what really intrigued me was a few weeks later, after the incident, when I was traveling through Pulwama, and I happened to visit the spot along with a small unit of the Indian Army, and some of the officers there were a part of the first response team. They were from the military intelligence, and that unit was the first response team to reach the spot from their nearby Panpur base. And one of the young officers, he told me that when he reached the spot, of course, it was a terrible, terrible blast, about 200 kilos of explosives used. And this particular bus, the CRPF bus, which was targeted, was blown to pieces. Right. But when this quick response team reaches there, they find the bodies of 4 CRPF personnel dangling. It's a double road, dangling on the other side of the road. There's a little hillock, and on that hillock, there's a communication tower, and the 4 bodies are dangling on that communication tower. So I think it is at that point in time when the story became sort of personal. And my effort as a conflict reporter also is to put faces beyond these statistics. You say 40 CRPF soldiers have died, they have been killed in action. But who are these 40 CRPF soldiers? Who are these 4 soldiers? They must have families and, dreams, aspirations, ambitions. And all of them came to a standstill, to an end, to a tragic end after this blast took place. So the story became personal, and, that is when I kind of started following the case more diligently. And as you said in your intro, right after the investigation begins and is handed over to the National Investigation Agency, the case hits a dead end. Apart from a few minor players, the National Investigation Agency does not know. It cannot connect its, the dots to Jaish-e-Mohammed and Pakistan and so on.
Right.
But it is only after a lot of hard work by the NIA investigators based in Jammu and Kashmir, along with the Jammu and Kashmir police, that finally led to the crackdown of this case.
Right. So, like you rightly pointed out, that you have put faces to those 40 names, because while reading it, I was thinking to myself that I did not know that Jaimal was the driver of the bus, and I didn't know that Mr. Singh was speaking to his family, and that person who, in fact, at the last moment shifted his bus from that bus that exploded to another bus. So, in fact, this makes it personal in a way when you read it also. So was that the time when you actually thought that whatever happens to this case, I mean, we don't know whether it's going to be, whether this investigation is going to lead anywhere, but you will be writing a book on this?
Well, it was a very intriguing case. The incident happens at about 3:15 p.m. on 14th Feb 2019. Less than 15 minutes later, the last video of the suicide bomber, Adil Ahmed Dar, is released. And when the NIA investigators look at the video, they find something very odd about the video. What is odd about the video is that, the person you see on the video is a man called Adil Ahmed Dar, but there is someone else juxtaposing his voice over. There's a lip sync happening. So these things intrigued us a lot. As conflict reporters, as storytellers. Right. So why was this happening? And of course, most of it we didn't know, because the NIA was still investigating the case, and the investigators, them being professional investigators, they were keeping all their cards close to their heart, and that is not the time when you really share things with reporters, right? So that was happening. So we were in absolute dark, but even the NIA investigators were in semi-darkness. They were dealing with these names every now and then. People like Sajjad Ahmed Bhat, who procured the car, another young man called Mudassir, who procures this gelatin stick used in the blast, and so on and so forth. But it is only after many months of hard work put in by the NIA that finally the case unravels. And as a journalist, as a storyteller, as a writer who's interested in such stories, it's a fascinating story, really. How this case reveals itself, of course, through a lot of hard work, but also by a few lucky strikes here and there, which almost feel divine here, as if there's some divine force which wants the NIA investigators, including Rakesh Balwal and others, the chief investigators, to kind of find these clues. Right. And they do, and the case unravels, really.
Moving away a little from the Pulwama incident, you also bring in a lot of interesting details about CRPF and how the force functions in Kashmir. So one line that I've picked up from the book is that a CRPF soldier would have preferred to actually be posted in Kashmir as compared to an LWE area, because you've also reported extensively from there and you've traveled in Bastar. So if you could just draw a comparison for us and just tell us what this means.
It's an interesting question, Ananya. I'll tell you why. Because, in the mid-2000s, there came a time when the situation had almost normalized in Kashmir, and things had become much better. And this is also roughly the time when the CRPF takes over from the Border Security Force as the main paramilitary force fighting the Islamist extremists. So, they have very little experience of Kashmir, especially in tackling law and order situations. Right. Then, by the time, the main duty of the CRPF is to, be a law and order force, very much like the police, and, they handle stone pelters and so on and so forth. Right. But it's not an easy life, but it's definitely an easier life as compared to what the CRPF was facing exactly at the same time in the left-wing extremist areas. In the mid-2000s, as you remember, the left-wing extremism, because, the CPM Maoist was formed in those days, and the attacks against security forces had multiplied. We also remember, I think in 2009, the then Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh, calling Naxalism India's biggest internal security threat. So that is the time really when I'm talking about. And, the CRPF, at least in those days, were very ill-equipped to handle what they saw in the Naxal areas. Okay. There was very little motivation. There were very little facilities they had there. In Kashmir, they were relatively in a much better position. In weather-wise, working in Bastar or Jharkhand is terrible, in the forest areas. You're constantly battling this invisible enemy, and then you have things like malaria. And like I said, the facilities are minimal, and you're dying on a day-to-day basis. Whereas in Kashmir, the situation was much better. And then it kind of, I won't say reverses, but it becomes different from 2015-16 onwards, especially after the death of the militant commander Burhan Wani, when Kashmir spirals into this chaos and the killings of the CRPF, it becomes as worse as what they faced, what the paramilitary forces or the army or the police faced in Jammu and Kashmir in the 90s. It becomes so bad. So that is the situation, I was referring to when I wrote about it in the book.
Right. Another very important and interesting bit in the book is how it demystifies the militants who take up arms. Because another very interesting bit that I picked up from the book was, unlike terrorists who are well trained in Pakistan and they cross over, the Kashmiri youngsters who pick up arms do not have the same zeal, the same rigor, the same kind of determination. So when you say that, what do you mean? Because it just collapses the image that we have of a Kashmiri militant in our heads.
That's always been the case, really, Ananya. Even in the good days of the so-called good days of militancy in the 90s, the Kashmiri militants, barring a few here and there, people like Noor Trali, who were extremely dangerous.
Right.
The Kashmiri men are not as highly trained or motivated as their counterparts in who come from jazz training camps or Al-Qaeda training camps in Pakistan. These are ruthless manipulators, and it also reflects in the way security forces in Kashmir have to deal with them. Right. So most of the Fidain attacks, as you know, are carried out mostly by these foreign militants, or the Mehmani Mujahid, as they are called in Kashmir. Right. So they are trained, and it takes the security forces a lot of time to deal with them. Right. And in terms of retaliation, there are casualties from the other side also, because it's very difficult. They are very well trained, unlike a Kashmiri militant. For example, like a young man like Burhan Wani. What training did he have? For all practical purposes, he was trained somewhere in the jungles of South Kashmir, somewhere in Tral, in the upper reaches of Tral, somewhere. And, of course, the media, magnified his image as a militant commander. But what experience did he really have as a militant commander? He spent all his, militant life, just a matter of few months, hiding in that forest area somewhere along with his band of boys. And all of them died one by one, within weeks of each other, frankly. Right. So that is the kind of even now, if you look, you cover the same beat as I, and even now when you look at operations in Kashmir, for how long do Kashmiri militants last when they are trapped in a building? Maybe a few hours, and they just die. So that is the kind of training I'm talking about.
Right. And also one thing about the rivalry between terror organizations on the ground, when we talk about Hizbul and Jaish, if you could just tell us a little about that.
Yes, so the militancy in Kashmir, terrorism in Kashmir was started by this organization called Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front.
Yes.
And the men of Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, people like Yasin Malik and Hamid Sheikh, Noor Muhammad Kalwal, these are the first band of boys who cross over to line of control to Muzaffarabad, to Pakistan-occupied Kashmir to get training. They receive a training of a few months and then they come back. And it then opens up a tap of sorts here, where thousands of young men are crossing over and receiving this, getting this training. But soon Pakistan realizes that, the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front is not what they are looking at, because JKLF, at least on its face, is asking for azadi or freedom from both India and Pakistan. And that is not a narrative that suits them. So quickly they are replaced by Hizbul Mujahideen. Hizbul Mujahideen is just, they openly talk about Kashmir's merger with Pakistan, and that is what suits them. So Hizbul Mujahideen becomes the main militant group in Kashmir. And then after a point in time, from mid 90s onwards, the Pakistanis realized that the Kashmiris are weakling in that sense. They can't hold on this movement for a long. So that is when foreign militants are introduced. That is when Masood Azhar is sent. But luckily for India and unfortunately for them, he's arrested, just hours after he lands in South Kashmir. And then to free him, because he's a very important man for the militant establishment, the terrorist establishment in Pakistan. Men like Ghazi Baba are sent. Their brief is simple to free Masood Azhar, and then gradually people come. We must also remember the incident of Mast Gul, where he lays siege in Chirari Sharif, and then after so many cordons and security layers, still manages to escape and lands back in Pakistan. So that is the time we are talking about.
So when you're writing a book like this, you're also presenting a lot of facts from the other side. One is that you're speaking to security officials, and other you have also quoted some publication from the terror organization. So how do you get to know the other side? Have you also spoken to people who have given up terrorism, probably who are now police informants? So that was a very interesting bit in the book.
So what happens when you're writing a book like this? You can't simply depend on only one version of one stream of versions.
Yeah.
So even if you look at the story of Ghazi Baba, where I tell the story of this mastermind of parliament attack. So for that story, the BSF officer who killed him, Narendranath Dubey and his, MR Binochandran and CP Trivedi and others, they have come on record for the first time to talk about their part of the story. But it's been a long time. So, whatever they've said, I've kind of corroborated them with multiple other sources from Jammu and Kashmir police, from military intelligence, because, all these agencies are actively involved in counterinsurgency operations in Kashmir. To give a little perspective of what is happening on the other side, I've spoken, like I say in the author's note, in the end of the book. I have also spoken to people who were at some point in time associated with Jaish, or at least knew what Jaish was up to.
Right.
Because, at the end of the day, Kashmir is a small place. A place like Tral is very small. Everyone knows each other, and everyone knows what the other side, what the neighbor is up to. So I've used a lot of internal sources also from, people who are familiar with the workings of Jaish, people who know some of the Jaish militants who are described in the book and so on.
It was a very difficult case, as you mentioned at the beginning also, because the NIA was reaching a dead end every now and then. So many terrorists got killed. I'm not going to ask you to give too much because I would want the viewers to read the book. But if you could just, highlight a little about that mobile phone, those Amazon packets that actually led to cracking of the case, and how that Samsung phone that was recovered after that encounter helped connect the dots.
So the mobile phone really becomes pivotal in unraveling this case.
Right.
And when the NIA investigators lay their hands upon this mobile, it's lying in a warehouse of sorts, in the Malkhana, as they call it, the police station, because it has been recovered from some people, and nobody has a clue about what this mobile phone really contains.
Right.
Because the limitations also in some ways of the counterinsurgency model in Jammu and Kashmir right now, or even before, has been, it's very focused on either the arrest or the elimination of terrorists. So the target is, the security agencies keep on doing these press conferences, right? Where you say from September to March, or from April to September, you killed X number of militants.
Right.
Which is, of course, a very significant component of the counterinsurgency model anywhere in the world. But where the police lacks sometimes is the investigation around it. To find out more, after the militant is dead, after the two terrorists who are holed up in some building are dead. So what next? So then I think there's a little, that part of counterinsurgency operations is a little lacking.
Yeah.
So that is where the NIA comes into play, and the NIA investigators take hold of this mobile phone. And of course, it's a very difficult thing to do because the mobile phone is damaged. The Jammu and Kashmir police, after getting some technology, tries to open it, but they can only open it partially. It is finally sent to this organization called CERTIN, where some of India's best technical investigators sit. And then, after a lot of hard work, of course, there's too much encryption involved, and the phone, like I said, is also damaged. Right. Is when the phone is opened, and it takes about a week to open. And the first picture which the man who's opening that phone sees is this picture of these three people: Adil Ahmed Dar, the mastermind, and another guy called Hanjila Jihadi, who are standing, and they're taking this selfie with that aluminum powder smeared on their faces.
Right.
Then it's a powerful picture, right? So and then the case opens up, and of course the NIA is very happy to know that the phone contains a lot of material, right. And then the report is prepared and sent to the NIA investigators in a matter of few hours. It's sent on priority. Right. It's made in record time and sent to NIA to put forward their case in the court.
Right. So, what about this Lover Boy of Bahawalpur? I mean, that chapter comes way down in the book, and throughout, for someone who doesn't know Umar Farooq, is constantly thinking, "Ki kaun hai Lover Boy of Bahawalpur?" And then, it all opens in the end. So, if you could just tell us a little about Umar, why did you call him the Lover Boy of Bahawalpur?
So, I've been receiving some feedback after I put this man on the cover. Some people on social media, as you were saying, that I'm trying to glorify a terrorist, and why am I calling it? Yes. So then, I tell them to see the actual dictionary meaning of the lover boy. The lover boy is someone who has multiple lovers. He's not someone who is loyal to one person. Correct. So he's not a lover. He's a lover boy, which is a completely different meaning. Right. So what I was trying to do is to reflect upon the ruthlessness and manipulative powers of someone like Umar Farooq, who is trained in one of the best joint facilities of Al-Qaeda and Jaish in Sangin camp in the Helmand province of Afghanistan. And, Helmand, this particular place becomes a graveyard for the British forces fighting the Taliban. It is here that he's trained. And he's so well trained, he's trained in practically everything. He's trained in drone technology.
Right. That I'll come to that. Yes.
That is a very important point right now, right? So in 2016, so we must also realize that for how long the Pakistanis have been working on it, and it's only now that India has woken up to it after a serious escalation and a serious attack on the Air Force station in Jammu. Right. So he's someone who's trained in the flying and the usage of drones as a potent weapon. He knows how to fire an anti-aircraft gun. He is, of course, a great expert in the in the usage of explosives. And then he's someone who's a very effective speaker. He speaks very well in Urdu, Dari, Pashto. Like his uncle Masood Azhar, he mesmerizes people when he speaks. And when he reaches Kashmir, he befriends these people, all the cadre. He is someone who motivates the suicide bomber Adil Ahmed Dar. And once he agrees to become the suicide bomber, he isolates him like they're trained from everyone else, so that he does not develop that kind of emotion or does not get to rethink about what he's about to do. Right. And then for furthering his end goal, really, he does not even bat an eyelid. He will do everything to further his end goal, which is the destruction of this CRPF convoy, right? And for that, he recruits these young people. He pretends to fall in love with Insha Jan. Insha Jan becomes his lover, but oblivious to Insha Jan, he has multiple such affairs, including one with her own cousin. It is only after her arrest, when the NIA investigators confront her with evidence about his involvement with other women, is when she finally breaks down and then spills the beans on other people. When the small modalities of the case really come together.
Right. While writing this kind of a book, there are a lot of things, of course, that you can't really write because it's a sensitive topic. And I'm sure the investigators must have been telling you that, you should just hold back this information. So how do you sift through information in a case like this? Because you're writing a book for a purpose so that people know what went behind the scenes. And at the same time, you have to be cautious enough to not give out too much. One instance that you write in the book is about Umar's mistake, which I'm also very intrigued about, which you've not mentioned anything about, but you have left that little teaser. So if you could just tell us something about it.
So as a writer, it's always a tough challenge. In the due course, when you speak to investigators and when you speak to police officers with whom you have a certain trust, which has been established over the years. It's not something which you develop in 6 months or a year or 2 years. It's been there for a long. And sometimes they reveal extra things to you. And but as an experienced journalist, you have to take that call, right? You don't want just for the share of a great story. You don't want those things to come out that will directly or indirectly help those who want to break the idea of India, really. So that's a tough call to take. But in this particular incident, I, as a storyteller also, I could not resist but tell the readers that I think it's also something which the reporters sometimes find fascinating. In the good old times when defense reporters used to report from somewhere on the international border. They would take extreme pride in getting a byline which said, say, Shekhar Gupta, somewhere from the Western Front, right? Shekhar has done that a lot. So I think, as journalists who go through this, we take immense pride in things like these. And as a storyteller, I could not, I had to put that thing there, just as a marker that I know some other things as well. So, yeah, but the investigators requested that not be made public because sometimes it will help the terrorist establishment. So I just kind of kept that to myself.
Okay. So before we wrap up, one last question, and this is very important because as we mentioned about that drone attack in Jammu, and in fact, your book also mentions how this drone business is not new. It has previously sent drugs and weapons also through drones. So, of course, an explosive was used for the first time, but this was not something that couldn't have been done. Right. So what is your take on this entire the incident that has happened? And now we are hearing so many speculations about LET's involvement, and the sources are telling us that it came from Pakistan. Somebody is also saying that it could be somebody from inside Jammu. So what is your take on that?
It's a very serious concern as far as I'm concerned, and I've been trying to flag it for some time. In the process of writing this book, I also visited the international border along in Jammu, in places like Samba, etc., where some of these tunnels used by people like Ashim Nehru, etc., have been detected. Wow. And I could see clearly from my conversations with people there, in the investigation agencies, that the usage of drones by Islamist extremists, sometimes in cooperation with the residue of Khalistani extremists in Punjab, was becoming a serious concern. They were extremely worried about it. And they've been trying to flag off their concerns to New Delhi, but New Delhi has kind of slept over it and has chosen not to do anything about it for months. And this threat has been there for some time now. what is concerning now is that so far these drones have mostly been used to um, ferry drugs or arms and ammunition across the border. And these are highly sophisticated drones uh, which fly miles and miles into the Indian territory. But what is extremely worrying now is that the Pakistanis have developed this capability to put payload along with it, which they can then guide to any military installation or maybe some civilian airport tomorrow, wherever they want to strike, and strike at this place with impunity. And as of now, we do not have any technology to counter it. The base of not very far away from today, uh, uh, brought down a drone, which was used for something very similar. But that was just because of sheer luck. I think the drone's battery had run out and it was flying much lower than what it was expected. And the BSF petrol party detected it. Of course, that time also it was flagged to New Delhi to Home Ministry, but they have chosen not to do anything with it. I'm hoping now that with this new threat, in the form of this attack on the Jammu Air Force Station, I think now is high time that the authorities finally wake up and see this as a very potent, significant threat to India in the coming weeks and months. Because we must remember that even Taliban has used this very effectively in attacking their targets in Afghanistan. And it's just a matter of time before some big tragedy happens in India. So we must be awake to it.
Do you also see this as an intelligence failure? Because when we see it in context of these 2-3 things, one is that attack outside Hafiz Sayyid's house, then there is these talks between the PM and political leadership in Jammu and Kashmir, and then there is this peace between Pakistan and the ceasefire on the border, LOC. So where do you put it? I mean, when you analyze in the this incident in context of these things?
I don't think Pakistan has ever been serious about ceasefire. I mean, in this context, what does ceasefire really mean? Does ceasefire only mean a cessation of exchange of fire on the line of control or international border? No, it doesn't mean. Ceasefire in its actuality means that you have to cease any kind of terror activity or any kind of such aggression towards the other party. Correct. So while this exchange of fire, medium fire and small fire may have stopped on the border for some time, but with this drone activity and so many other drone activities have been spotted around military installations on the outskirts of Jammu city, this becomes a very serious threat. Then we must also see what is happening in Kashmir. In Kashmir, no attack can happen without a go-ahead from the JAS leadership, which is in cohorts with the Pakistan's ISI. So those attacks are happening. The SPO has been killed, his family has been wiped out, the inspector has been killed. It's again, a leaf from really Ghazi Baba's strategy, which he introduced in 2000, where you recruit these young men and they have no training, It just doesn't take much to fire an AK-47 or a pistol. So you target these policemen in ones or twos, so to keep the violence at optimum level. So the challenge is really on. The sad part is that as we say in the counterinsurgency in the doctrine, the security agencies always need it. They have to thwart an attempt 10 out of 10 times. But it takes a militant organization or terrorist organization just one chance out of 10 to strike. So while intelligence needs a lot of improvement and overhaul and a lot of coordination, but sometimes these things cannot be avoided. But the idea is to remain awake to new threats, latest technological advances used by terror groups to launch themselves from the launch pads in Pakistan, to use, to counter new technological advancements like the usage of drones, etc. I think that is where the next big headache from India is going to be. And I hope India remains aware of that.
Thank you so much for joining us and giving us this book that not just gives you an insight on how the investigation went on in the Pulwama attack, which is the most dastardly attack in a long time, but it also gives us an insight on the encounters, how encounters happen, these terrorists, their past, what all goes on in Kashmir. So thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Rahul Pandita.
Thank you, Ananya. It was a pleasure meeting you.